Good morning. Welcome to News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. Our analysts this week are former state senator and mayor of Portland, Democrat Ethan Strimling, and former Republican state senator Phil Harriman. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Hi, Ethan.
Good morning, Pat. Good morning, Phil.
So plenty to talk about as the legislature has been rushing to get things done, but so has the Mills administration, which this week created a new back-to-work program aimed at getting unemployed Mainers back into the workforce. It will tap $10 million in federal funding to provide a one-time $1,500 payment, signing bonus, if you will, for workers who start jobs before the end of this month, and $1,000 for those who start jobs in July. Ethan, is this a worthwhile experiment?
Look, anything that gets more money into the pockets of struggling workers in this state, absolutely, it's a good idea. But let's understand, this is temporary. It's less than $1 an hour on average annually, so it's not going to, transform anybody's life. I don't know that it's going to get a lot of people into the workforce that wouldn't have gone in otherwise. But certainly, as I said, it's a good idea to get more money into the pockets of working families. Another way to do that would be to simply start to raise wages, in particular, get the minimum wage up higher. You get it up to $15 an hour statewide, like it's projected to be in Portland. That's going to have some real impact.
Well, I see it very differently. This was predictable. In fact, when this idea was first proposed by Senator Sanders, the comments were, you're going to incentivize people not to work. And of course, that labeled people who are perhaps more conservative in their approaches, uncaring, unfeeling, putting a burden on the little person, so to speak. And here we are now trying to incentivize people to go back to work. And I would just respectfully say, if we're going to give people bonuses, it ought to be people who are working through the pandemic and under the most difficult challenges. They're the ones who should be rewarded.
One of the big
sounds like you support hazard pay in Portland, buddy. That's what we did. Sorry, Pat.
It's a valid point. It's the effort has been made to attack this in a lot of ways. The legislature's been busy with a number of things, including Pine Tree Power. That proposal would create a consumer-owned utility by buying out Central Maine Power and Versant Power. It won initial votes in the House and Senate. It stalled narrowly in the Senate when two senators flipped their votes just before adjournment. And Governor Mills has said the proposal needs more study before it could be passed and sent to voters. She's likely to veto it if it is, in fact, passed later this month. Phil, does this still have the momentum to eventually be enacted?
Well, it could. I think what Ethan and I would both agree on is that behind the scenes, the governor has let it be known that she doesn't want this bill on her desk. So some senators who voted on the prevailing side reconsidered their decision. And I could go on, but that's a little bit of the behind the scenes inside baseball. The fact is that this is a clear message to both utilities. Boy, if you don't want this momentum to continue and have this at the referendum ballot box, you got to do a better job of meeting customers' expectations. And I also think it's a message to the Public Utilities Commission that there's enough legislators and perhaps enough citizens who want to see some changes.
Absolutely right. CMP and Versant, it's been very clear. Even legislators who are standing up saying they don't support this are commenting on how much they don't like CMP and Versant. And I think the message is clear. Look, this is going to the ballot. It's going to go to the ballot in 2021, or it's going to go to the ballot in 2022. That's really the only decision that the legislature is making. Two senators did flip their votes. One of them was a Republican, so I don't think he flipped his vote because of anything Janet Mills did or didn't do. I don't know about Senator Claxton one way or the other. Very disappointing, obviously. As Phil will tell you, though, nothing is ever fully dead in Augusta. There are always ways to revive things. I'm sure in the next 2 weeks they'll be working very hard to get that final vote and see if they can get Janet to let it go to the voters.
Well, and just imagine if it's on the ballot in 2022 and Janet Mills is up for re-election, that would certainly add a new dimension to that campaign.
Right,
absolutely.
Right.
Voters in Portland are going to have their say this fall on a referendum on limiting the size of emergency shelters. It would limit most of those shelters to 50 beds and make some other changes as well. This is a response to the plan to build a 200-bed shelter in the Riverton neighborhood. Ethan, is this a good way to make public policy on something that is so vital to the community?
It seems to be the only way to make good public policy at this point. It was so predictable. This issue about closing the shelter downtown where the services are that people need. And remember, in this referendum, it's saying that we can have shelters. We should have shelters. Let's have small shelters, which is something that a lot of us were pushing the council to do a number of years ago. And unfortunately, they just simply didn't listen. All the models say small shelters are the way to go. It's better integration into the community. It allows for more one-on-one interaction. So this is predictable because the council just was somehow stuck on wanting to shut down the most important shelter we have in the city of Portland downtown and push it to the edge of Westbrook, and just a bad solution.
And Phil, this, of course, is an enormous issue in Maine's largest city.
Yeah, and I suspect it will be a topic of discussion in other larger cities in Maine. To me, Pat, what it does is it produces another problem, because this Riverton site location that had 200 beds was met with opposition that is now, as Ethan has commented on, heading to a referendum. But that means if you're going to have 50-bed shelters, then you've got to go find 4 locations around the city to make this work, and that's going to be challenging as well.
On the national or international scene, in fact, Presidents Biden and Putin met in Geneva for their first face-to-face summit. Phil, what's your take on how it went?
Well, I think it's fair to say that President Biden purposely set the bar and expectations low. I think American-Russian relations are probably at probably the most strained time in recent past, and I'm curious to see what unfolds after this summit in terms of public policy or behavior by the United States or by Russia. What I do think happened was that Biden made it very clear that if Russia is going to be behind the scenes infiltrating our technology system and doing economic harm to us, the president is prepared to act aggressively.
Yeah, I think the biggest news is how quiet it was. We don't have all the bluster and what we were having the previous 4 years. I think that the administration's doing a good job. I wasn't expecting them to go in there and have fireworks and try to come up with some big answer. I'm glad that we're sort of taking it slowly here. I do think that, President Biden did a good job of getting people on board with what America is trying to do, which is try to grow our economies internally. Hopefully other countries will follow that lead. Also, climate change, just the most important issue we're confronting. So anyway, nice to see that there were not a lot of fireworks and that maybe some work got done.
This past week, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected another effort led by Republican-led states, in this case, to repeal the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Phil, are you surprised by the court's ruling, and is this fight finally over?
I think it is over, Pat, but I am surprised because you may recall that Judge Roberts was the determining vote on the Supreme Court that declared Obamacare constitutional because it was a tax, and that the Congress had the power to tax. Well, the taxing piece of Obamacare has been removed, leaving it vulnerable based on the first opinion of the Supreme Court. So I do think the issue is dead. I'm a little confused as to how it was constitutional when it had a tax component and how it is now still constitutional without it.
Well, this was a smackdown. I mean, no doubt about it. This was 7-2, overwhelming, not only Roberts, but joined by other conservative members of the court, and basically said to all these states, where's the harm? Which is exactly what Phil's talking about. The tax the tax provision is still there. The Congress has just made the penalty zero. So in effect, it doesn't have that implication, which is kind of dumb. It should be in place, no doubt about it. But the Supreme Court basically said there's been no harm to your states.
But do you think the fight is over?
Well, the fight's never over, unfortunately, because there are forces that are trying to undermine the expansion of healthcare in this country every day, and we need to go even further. So the big fight is to get to Medicare for all, and we ultimately need to get to that. But no, the fight will never be over in this case. But I'm glad that the Supreme Court has now, for the third time, told people who are trying to stop this expansion of healthcare, you are incorrect in your arguments.
Speaking of the nation's highest court, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell indicated this week he is willing to block Supreme Court nominations by President Biden if the Republicans retake control of the U.S. Senate. Now, perhaps that notion will give Justice Stephen Breyer pause because many Democrats hope he'll resign so Biden can select a replacement as soon as possible. But you have to ask yourself, Ethan, is Mitch McConnell just trying to fundraise for Democrats? Because this is one of those issues they're just going to jump all over.
Yeah, no doubt he's trying to raise money for Democrats, and no doubt that I actually expect that he would try to block it. He's already proven that he's willing to bypass 200 and something years of precedent in the United States. What he did, it's probably one of the most egregious things that he did as majority leader, and I think we should make the voters very clear that he plans to do it again. But I don't actually think that Breyer should step down. You can't, as Phil will probably tell you, when people try to game the market, the financial markets, and just time it perfectly, you can never time it perfectly. You just need to do it when it needs to be done. But let me tell you, if anybody needs to step down, it should be Clarence Thomas. He's been on there too damn long.
Phil?
No partisanship there. I see it a little differently. The fact is, going back to the 1880s, when the president and the Senate are of different parties, judges have not been confirmed. And that's just the facts of the history of how the Senate and the presidency have treated each other. My hope is that this could be a breakthrough if the Republicans do gain control of the Senate in the next election, and that Biden realizes that for him to get anything done past then, that he needs to nominate someone that Republicans could embrace. And
Phil, I think it's worth noting that when Merrick Garland was nominated, he wasn't voted down. He just McConnell would not even allow hearings and a vote, because I think he knew he would have been confirmed. So it's one thing for the Congress to vote down a nominee as opposed to just not even allowing the discussion.
Good point, and I agree.
And let me just be clear, Phil, just so the viewers know, there have been plenty of nominees that have been nominated by a Republican president and awarded the seat by a Democratic Senate, and vice versa. So when you're saying that happens all the time, what happens all the time is a president who makes a nomination, most of the time, regardless of the party in power, it gets through, as it should.
Now, we have a bipartisan group of 20 senators, including Angus King and Susan Collins, closing in on an infrastructure deal, roughly $1 trillion total, $579 billion in new spending. Angus King has pushed for reducing the so-called IRS tax gap to help pay for the bill, meaning collecting all of the taxes that are owed by Americans already and stopping tax cheaters. Ethan, some Democrats aren't happy with this package yet. It's certainly not finalized, but would they block it because it's not progressive enough?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we don't know the details of this package yet. It's all very fluid. I'm glad there are talks going on. Of course, no doubt about that. That's always a good idea. But the initial, communications that we're hearing makes it sound wholly inadequate in terms of the crisis we are confronting in this country. And that's what we have to keep our eye on, the crisis we are confronting in terms of building our economy back up, in terms of climate change, and in terms of economic inequality, which is what was fundamentally addressed through the tax policy, through the incentives, and through all the investments of Joe Biden's original plan. So I think everybody should judge the final plan based on, is it adequate to meet the crisis we are in or not? If it is, then they should move forward.
What I'm hearing is that there is general consensus among Democrats and Republicans about an infrastructure package and how to pay for it, if it includes people paying the amount of taxes they owe, or if they're cheating to enforce them to pay. That would make the package balance. What I'm concerned about is that Democrats will join in with Republicans to pass one package, and then they'll go through a different legislative procedure to add on all of the other things that they can't seem to reach consensus on among Democrats and Republicans.
All right, let's talk about our winners and losers in politics this week. Ethan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the winners this week, probably not really noticed, but up in the legislature, a lot of very good pro-worker bills were actually passed, led by a lot of unions in the state, just trying to make sure that people get prevailing wages, that they're, having the kind of workplace safety and training that they need on government contracts, and even some contracts that are in the private sector. So really, workers in the state of Maine, unions, definitely winners this week as the legislature finishes up its work. Losers, sadly, the ratepayers. We talked about it earlier with CMP. CMP's lobbyists winning that battle up in the legislature to flip 2 votes and kill the COU. Definitely not a winner for the ratepayers, but I suspect ratepayers will have the final say in the end.
And Phil.
Loser of the week, clearly the governor's proposal to give people $1,500 to get off of unemployment and go to work. That's the wrong message to send, in my opinion. The winner is the Treasury Department, which is about to mint new quarters honoring women of historic significance.
Good news, indeed.
Yes.
Look forward to carrying some of that change around. That is going to do it for News Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you be with us. See you next time. News Center Maine is back after this.